The walls shook with a sound like thunder. It wasn't thunder, it was the sound of metal slamming, fists pounding, and men shouting from behind locked steel doors. Down in the segregation wing of ADX Florence, the nation's most secure prison, chaos had broken out. A guard's voice echoed through the corridor, barking orders, "Lock down! Everyone down!" But no one was listening. Inside cell 230, a man named Trey stood pressed against the narrow window of his door, watching as two inmates down the tier smashed food trays and hurled them through the slot openings. Even from behind thick bulletproof glass, Trey could feel the rage, the fear, the madness. He had seen fights before, but nothing like this. Sirens wailed. Red lights flashed. The corridor glowed in a pulsing haze of warning signals. Through the narrow window, Trey saw an inmate named Rico, a tall man with tattoos up his neck, shouting words Trey couldn't make out. Suddenly, Rico lunged at another inmate who had slipped out of his cuffs during a shower return. The two crashed into the metal gate, struggling, snarling like trapped dogs. Trey pounded his fist on his own door, yelling, "Stop! They'll gas the whole tier!" But it was too late. A loud pop cracked through the air, followed by a cloud of white mist. The guards had fired a canister of tear gas. Trey's eyes burned. His lungs felt like fin. The men fighting screamed as the gas filled their cells. Then, silence. The kind of silence that made the air heavy, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Trey fell to his knees, coughing hard, clutching his chest. For a few seconds, everything blurred. The gas stung his eyes, and through the tears he thought he saw something impossible. Rico standing in the haze, staring right at him through the cell window. But Rico's eyes were strange, wide, cold, and still. A deep thud followed. Rico's body hit the floor. Then came the click of boots. Guards in riot gear stormed the tier, shouting orders and dragging men out one by one. Trey backed up to the far wall, his heart pounding like a drum. He heard the cell next to him open. A voice shouted, "Cell 24 down!" Trey froze. Cell 24 was his neighbor, Bishop. A quiet man, always calm, always reading. But as the guards opened Bishop's door, Trey heard something he'd never forget. A slow, broken laugh coming from the darkness inside that cell. The guard's voice turned sharp. "Hey, what's so funny?" The laugh stopped. Then Bishop said in a calm, steady voice that sent chills down Trey's spine, "They told us this place was built to break men. But you can't break what's already gone." The next sound was the crack of a baton. And then, nothing but the buzz of the lights above. Trey pressed his forehead to the cold steel door, breathing in the thick chemical air. He knew what would come next. Days, maybe weeks, of total lockdown. No talking, no movement. Just silence and shadows. But this time something inside him had changed, something he couldn't name. And as the tear gas slowly cleared, Trey whispered to himself, "This is how it starts." The next morning, everything was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that made the ticking pipes and the hum of the vents sound louder than breathing. Trey lay on the hard concrete bed, staring up at the ceiling where paint had started to peel away like old skin. His eyes burned from the tear gas, and his throat still hurt, but his mind was wide awake. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rico's face, frozen in that final stare. The guards had dragged his body out hours ago, but no one said if he was alive or not. In ADX Florence, no one ever got the truth. After breakfast, if you could call cold oatmeal and a slice of bread breakfast, a voice came through the speaker. "Cell 213, prepare for review." Trey sat up straight. That meant the warden wanted answers, not to find justice, but to find someone to blame. Minutes later, two guards opened his door. Their faces were hidden behind black visors. One of them cuffed Trey's hands behind his back, while the other scanned his cell. "Move," one said. Trey followed, bare feet against the cold floor. They led him down a long hallway lined with locked metal doors. Each one looked the same: small slot, narrow window, and a single number. But inside each was a man fighting his own battle against time, loneliness, and madness. Some whispered to themselves. Others banged their heads softly on the walls, just to feel something. Inside the interview room, Warden Hale sat behind a steel desk. He was older, with sharp gray eyes that saw everything and trusted nothing. "Sit," Hale said. Trey sat. The cuffs bit into his wrists. "You were near the incident," Hale began. "You saw what happened." Trey hesitated. "I saw chaos. Rico lost it. He attacked another inmate." "Why?" Hale asked. Trey looked down. He wanted to say, because everyone's losing their mind in here. Because the silence eats at you until you start airing things that aren't real. Because isolation isn't punishment. It's poison. But he didn't. "I don't know," Trey said softly. The warden studied him for a long time. "You've been clean since transfer. No fights, no contraband. That's rare here." "I keep to myself," Trey replied. "Good," Hale said, leaning back. "Keep it that way. You do your time quiet. You walk out in one piece. Start getting involved in other people's problems. You end up like Rico." Trey nodded, but something about those words didn't sit right. When they brought him back to his cell, the guards stopped at Bishop's door. One leaned in and muttered, "He's on observation now. No talk, no mail." Trey glanced at the small window in Bishop's door. A single eye looked back at him, calm, steady, and unreadable. Bishop mouthed one word: "Watch." The door slammed shut. That night, Trey couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The vents rattled louder than usual. Faint whispers echoed through the tier, low, secret voices trading messages between cells. He pressed his ear against the wall and heard it clear this time. Bishop's voice. "They think they can cage the mind," he whispered. "But what if the mind breaks the cage?" Trey pulled away, chills running down his arms. Then from somewhere down the hall came a single scream, short, sharp, and real. And the lights went out. The darkness swallowed everything. No lights, no sound. Just the distant hum of the prison's generators fading into silence. Trey sat frozen on his bunk, staring into the black. He could hear only his heartbeat, pounding fast, too loud for the tiny cell. Then came a faint scraping sound, metal against concrete. It wasn't coming from his cell. It was coming from Bishop's. "Bishop," Trey whispered through the air vent. "What's happening?" No reply. Just the slow, steady scrape again. Then a soft tap. Pause. Another tap. It sounded like a pattern, like code. Trey had learned enough in ADX to know that inmates sometimes tapped messages through the walls. He counted the taps. 7. Then 3. Then 2. He didn't know what it meant, but it didn't feel random. It felt planned. A red emergency light flickered on in the hallway, bathing the cells in a ghostly glow. Through the small window, Trey saw shadows moving, guards running past, shouting into radios. Something big was happening somewhere else in the prison. Maybe another fight. Maybe worse. The intercom crackled to life. "All inmates remain in your cells. Do not move. This is not a drill." Trey stood and pressed his palms to the cold steel door. "Bishop," he called again. "Talk to me." This time, Bishop's voice came back, low and calm. "You ever wonder what happens when they push a man too far?" "Don't do anything crazy," Trey said quickly. "They'll come for you." Bishop chuckled softly, a sound that sent chills down Trey's back. "They already did, years ago." Before Trey could reply, another explosion of noise ripped through the tier. A loud bang, followed by a cloud of dust shaking from the ceiling. Alarms blared again, and red lights flashed faster. Trey could smell smoke. He hit the door with his fist. "Guard, somebody answer!" But no one came. He turned toward the vent again. "Bishop, what did you do?" There was a long pause. Then Bishop said, "I didn't start this, Trey. I just gave them a reason to look." Trey froze. Then he realized what Bishop meant. Somewhere someone had found a way to cause chaos in a place built to be unbreakable. The alarms weren't for a fight. They were for a breach. Minutes passed before the heavy thud of boots echoed again. Guards moved door to door, shouting, "Everyone down, hands visible." Trey lay flat on the floor, coughing as smoke drifted under the door. He couldn't see Bishop's cell anymore. The smoke was too thick. But he heard one last thing before the guards reached his cell. Bishop's voice, calm as ever. "They can lock us in cages, Trey. But the real prison is the silence they make us live in." Then came another crash, metal hitting metal, and Bishop's voice was gone. When the smoke cleared hours later, Trey was still alive. The riot was over. The lights came back on. Guards walked past his cell, faces hard, weapons drawn. They didn't say what had happened, but Trey could see it in their eyes. Something inside ADX Florence had cracked that night. Days later, Trey was moved to another unit. The warden said nothing about Bishop. His cell was empty, sealed with a new steel plate welded over the door. At night, Trey would lie on his bunk, staring at the wall where Bishop's cell used to be. Sometimes, when everything went silent, he thought he could still hear faint tapping through the pipes. 7, 3, 2. He never figured out what the code meant. But he knew one thing for sure. Life at ADX Florence wasn't about living. It was about surviving the kind of loneliness that turned men into ghosts. And every time the lights flickered, Trey whispered to himself, "Still here, still human."